And so here we are, Friday Night Live with Dr. Kim, and we're talking about daddy issues tonight. What the heck are daddy issues, right? And I already know a couple of people were like, oh boy, especially when I put it on my personal page, the men were already gunning for me. And so I want to make sure I add a few disclaimers. Hey, Angela, I want to add a few disclaimers before we get started tonight. And I think for most of you who know me, know I don't do man bashing at all. Okay, men are some of my favorite people. So I don't do man bashing. But the purpose of this conversation is for us to see how our relationships with our fathers, whether they've been in our lives or not, how it's affected us as women. And so I know that sounds very therapeutic in itself, right? Well, let's go back to our childhood and explore, what happened to us. But it's true. All of our behaviors are rooted into how we were raised and the experiences that we've had. And so we're going to take a look at that and look at that tonight. Whether you had a wonderful father, okay, like I have, a less than ideal relationship with your father, whether it's due to death or absence or abandonment, this connection or lack thereof is critical to the development of children, but essential and very influential in the lives of women, right? In the lives of women. So I'm gonna give you a little history. Always we got to do our homework. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of history. We're going to look at how children develop their identity. So how did all of us come to believe who we are and behave who we are and identify as we identify? And then we're going to look at the types of fathers that there are, 6 types of fathers we're going to look at. And then the behaviors that come from being raised or not being raised by the types of fathers that I described. And so I'm hoping that I will see some good conversation in the chat that will help me add to what it is I want to talk about tonight. So we're going to have, as we always do, a bi-directional conversation. Even though you're not on the screen with me, you're most definitely, we're talking, and I want you to inform what it is that I'm discussing. So if you hear something that makes you go, ouch, let's ouch together, because it's a few ouches in here for me. If there's something that makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to say that. If there's something that you want me to elaborate on, I'm always available. Daddy issues, Faith. We're talking about daddy issues tonight. And what does that look like in the lives of adult women? And so a lot of people would, the other pushback, if I can say that, the other pushback I got with this topic is some people think it's a pretty canned topic. It's like, oh, wow, that's how they explain everything that's wrong with a woman. Oh, you have daddy issues. And so hey, Lynette, so what I want to do is, there's going to be a couple that are kind of cliche, but I really hope that we're able to go beyond what people normally think about when they say a woman has daddy issues. So I kind of saved those to the end. Okay. So you ready? All right, here's my disclaimer. It is a difficult subject for us to talk about. And just this weekend in general, just as many holidays are, I know it can be a challenge for women who do not have their fathers with them anymore physically. They've passed on, or perhaps they were never in their lives. That can leave an empty space, and it can be difficult to navigate. Again, all holidays, but definitely Father's Day. And so I definitely want to acknowledge that I know that this can be a difficult conversation for some of you to engage in. I also want to make sure that I say that mother issues exist. Okay, mother issues do exist. And so we will have to talk about that on another evening. Okay, but most definitely, again, this is not just to, dog out the brothers or dog out men, but to highlight that on Father's Day. How has that relationship affected us? So this conversation may incite some triggers. So watch and participate at your own risk. If we were doing this in person, I would say the same thing. You know, if you need to zap out, tap in when you're ready or need to. And you might also, this might be the beginning of knowing that, you know what, it might be time for me to talk to somebody about some of these things. And if you're not already in counseling or therapy, and you know, I'm all for that. So we are pro therapy here. We are pro mental health, um, wellness, and there is no shame in that. There is no stigma attached to that. So that's my disclaimer before we get into it. Okay, are you ready? We ready? Okay. So the first big chunk of this is, why is this important? Because parents help children form their identity. And so for those of you who don't know me personally, as an early childhood professor, and before that as an early childhood teacher, a lot of my time was spent observing children and observing those relationships with their parents to have an idea of how I needed to support them in the classroom as a teacher. And so a big part of children's learning had to do with, how do they feel about themselves? How do they see themselves? And coming to school for the first time, that's super important, because if a child is not feeling good about themselves, or if they have been given some messages like I'm going to talk about in a moment, it's going to be a barrier to them learning. And so the purpose of us talking about this tonight is see how did some of those things that happen in early childhood affect how we are forming and maintaining relationships now as grown women. So children learn about themselves and their identity based on their interactions with parents. By the age of 5, your identity is set, if you've not heard that before. And it's shaped by direct and indirect messages that they get from the adults in their home environment. So by direct, that could mean what is said to you directly, again, from your parents or caregivers. In this case tonight, we're talking about fathers. So if you had a father that directly complimented you, affirmed you, told you were smart, you were beautiful, that would be an example of a positive direct message. You may have had a father that said you kind of on the lazy side. You don't ever clean up your room, or you're always late, or you're sloppy, or you're not so smart, you don't study hard. That would be a negative direct message. But for many people, it's the indirect messages that become just as important. And so if you're ignored by a parent, or if you're not selected to spend time with, or to take you out of the house, that might be an indirect message that maybe you're not so lovable. Maybe there's something about you that I don't quite like. One of the terms that comes up, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but they call that bad mirroring. Bad mirroring. So parents actually, whatever it is they present to their children, offers a mirror for that child to see themselves. And so if you construct a mirror that's based on, like the examples I was just giving, really negative images of themselves, that's how they're going to show up by the age of 5, believing who they are. I will give you a really, really extreme example. Okay. I wish Shirley was here, because I think this she'll remember this one. But when I was teaching kindergarten, probably the second year or so I was teaching, and I had a little boy in the class, and when I would call attendance, he would never respond. And so initially, you know, myself and my assistant was like, wow, okay, maybe there's some hearing problems. And so we knew we were going to have hearing screening done. But in the meantime, of course, wow, we need to see what's going on with this youngster. So I would stand next to his desk and call his name and tap him on his shoulder. And he'd just kind of look at me like, I don't, that name means nothing to me. So something told me one day, let me ask him, hey, cousin Jackie, come on in here. What do they call you at home? So I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's a nickname. And we ran into that a lot, you know, on the sheet, your name is Takesha, but they call you home, you Bay. You baby girl, you know, you sweetie pie, you peaches. So I said, well, honey, what does mommy, what does grandma call you? And he said his name was Mother Blank. That's what he thought his name was. And I was stunned. So here I am in a group full of 5-year-olds. Did he just did he just say his name was Mother? And he did. And so now I'm trying to picture this. And as soon as he said that, everything else about him made sense. If somebody said, "Come here, Mother. Get over here, Mother. Sit down, Mother." What do you think his image was of himself? It wasn't very positive. It wasn't very positive. Hey, Elena, good evening. And so names, again, a whole nother program for that. But names mean something. And so here it is. This child's self-image was something negative. I'm always calling you because you're missing something. You're not where you're supposed to do. You get on my nerves. Your existence is disturbing. And so it was very difficult for him to engage with the other children. It was impossible for him to pay attention in class and become a part of anything, because at home he was treated like, I don't really want you here. Okay. So that's super important. Little child development here. Erik Erikson had identified 8 stages that people go through to develop mentally and socially. But what I was really interested in, watch this, was James Marcia. This is like in the 90s, built on Erikson's theory. And he posited that there's 4, I know cousin Jackie likes to take notes, 4 identity statuses that we all go through to develop our identity. And these stages that he talks about happens during our teen years. Okay, so remember what I said a minute ago, your identity is pretty set at age 5. And so you sit with that identity for a while, pretty much however your parents have shaped you. So if you've been affirmed as a really great kid, you're going to pretty much operate in that vein up until 12 or 13, James Marcia says. And so here's the 4 stages. The first one is identity diffusion. So we get to 12 or 13 and we just kind of go internal and start figuring out, who am I really? That thought pattern is really disorganized. It's kind of a mumble jumble of all the things you've heard about yourself as you were growing up. What's up, LG? Come on in here, girl. Good to see you. Okay. So identity diffusion, that's the beginning part of really now settling into your identity. And you're trying to figure out if everything that people have said about you in your microsystem. Okay. So now I'm bringing in a little Bronfenbrenner. This is all my classes I've taught coming to this live tonight. But Bronfenbrenner talks about the microsystem, right? So all of the concentric circles that are around a child that influence how they develop. That's home, that's school, that's the neighborhood, that's media. Okay. So all of those external messages, that's what we're dealing with in identity diffusion. And then a young person moves into what's called foreclosure. And it doesn't have to do with losing your house. But what we do during that stage is accept the messages of the adults in authority and try to get them to affirm them. So now we're kind of like, this is who you said I am. I need for you to explain that, affirm that, show me more about how to be like this. And so they're seeking out adults to guide them. That is why mentorship is so important, right? In those teen years, everybody loves to work with the little ones, but those teen years at 13 to 17, that's a critical time, We're starting to see the advent of those groups, particularly for girls. There's been a lot in the last 20 or 30 years for young men, but now we're seeing the importance of providing that same support for young women, because they need other women to help affirm, yeah, you are beautiful. I asked the question in the group tonight about beauty. That's a conversation that needs to be had with young women, with other women, as well as men, okay? So next we move into moratorium. And that's sometimes, hey, Ruth, during this part, this third step in the process of solidifying your identity, you can see young people starting to get a little anxious. And that's normal to be a little rebellious and say, wait a minute, everybody has said I'm this really great student. Let's stay on the positive. My dad, he was at all my games, he was at all my spelling bees, and I'm this great person. But is that who I am really? Usually around that time, we also start hearing a little bit of our family history. And so if I'm this person and my dad is treating me like this, since we're talking about fathers tonight, how different is that in how he was treated? Did I get that from him? That's why DNA studies and those connections of genealogy are so important. That's part of our identity. So if I'm like this, where did this come from? And so you can see right there in that the dilemmas that can come from not knowing your father or not having access to your father when you're really trying to figure out where did these different parts of me come from, both good and bad, both good and bad. And so we start seeing kids too engage in short-lived relationships. So dating happens around that time. And so not only are the parents an influence, but now the peers become the primary influence, right? We even call them socializing agents in child development. And so these relationships that they get in. So now we have young women who are now starting to date at the stage where they're still trying to figure out who I am. And so typically a girl is going to choose a partner, in this case, boyfriends, that are similar to the dad she had or the dad she aspired to have. And I'm going to come back to that. And so as she moves into that last stage, which is where the identity is solid now. So now we're at the end of adolescence, moving into adulthood. You're going inward again and you're processing again. What has everybody said about me? Now, what is my peer group saying about me? And what part of that am I going to accept? Or what part of that am I going to challenge? What part of that am I going to test out and try and say, I don't know. I think I want to be identified with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And so for me, I'd always been that good kid, right? My dad bragged about my vocabulary, what a great vocabulary I had, and what a good writer I was. Hey, Kelly, good evening. And so for me, it's like, okay, that's great that I'm this honor student and I'm seen, as a really smart girl. But I also wanted to be accepted by the peer group. The boys were not coming at nerds. Okay. So what do I need to do so I can find me a boy like my dad? So my dad likes smart girls, but what else? My dad likes girls who were into music. And so that was something that he kind of, internalized with me that was important. So I was like, okay, so maybe I need to pay some more attention to that part of it. Maybe I need to dance a little bit more so I can be attractive to the opposite sex. Maybe that needs to be a part of how I want people to see me, that I'm fun to be around and, I can party too. I know, bad nerd, right? And then the sad part, one of the things that I adopted that I'm not proud of, right, was learning how to play the dozens. So I did kind of a flip on what my dad said about my vocabulary and learn how to cuss people out. So they were, oh, she's kind of cool. Right? She could break you down. Also a defense mechanism, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So that last stage, you'll see young people just trying to press the envelope a little bit and saying, how can I balance the alternatives to what everybody has said about me and really find my niche in the neighborhood, in my peer group, in my family? We also see right around that time where a lot of young people will come out sexually and they will profess to have, to not be heterosexual. They'll profess their homosexuality because now they're secure in the messages I've received, my lived experience, and now I feel safe to say that, you know what, no, this is where I'm like my family, or this is where how you've described me is true, and this is where I'm different. So again, whether that's I was the good girl and I want to be the bad girl, everybody said I was straight, but I am not. All of those moving parts becomes solidified. So young people navigate this process by two variables, and I thought this was really good. Jackie, are you still taking notes? Because I thought this was good. So we move through all of those phases of identity by two variables, crisis or commitment. And that sounds like even the life that we live now. Every time we learn something about ourselves is based on what? A crisis we go through, and then the commitment of trying to either be what we've said we are or to be something different. Very difficult to do because you're not in a vacuum. So in the case of this topic, children, in this case, girls, are looking to the men in their lives to say, who am I really? Help me to do this. I need this affirmation. Whether it's dysfunctional or not, I need that interaction for you to figure this out. Who am I and how will I show up in the world with the men that I will meet? The crisis piece, I think, is critical as well, because whatever those interactions are, whatever those experiences are, shape whether what they've said about you is true or not. So because kids are egocentric, I really want you to, especially some of you, hey, Sheena, I'm glad you made it. Some of you who are still parenting or if you're a grandparent, this is something to keep in mind. Kids are egocentric. Even going up through the teen years, I would say even into late adolescence, 18 to 25, they tend to be very egocentric. What does that mean? Everything that happens around me has to do with me. Have you seen, and I know you see that with young children, right? And so if there's a father, hey, Siobhan, if there's a father who is mistreating a child, they immediately believe I'm being mistreated because there's something wrong with me. I'm unlovable. Maybe I'm ugly. I'm not smart, but something is wrong with me. The reason why my father won't spend any time with me, the reason why my father calls me names, the reason why my father spends time maybe with my brothers and sisters and not me. But because children are egocentric, they don't believe all of what we say, but they believe mostly what we do. Kids, though, even though when they are abused or neglected, they tend to protect those parents. Have you ever seen that? I need you all to start talking to me. Have you ever seen that? You're like, that is everybody in the family and in the neighborhood can see this father is dysfunctional. He never shows up. This kid is sitting in the window waiting for him to come and he doesn't come. But if anybody says anything about that father, they're going to defend him. They're going to defend him. There's a reason why he did this for. But my dad is a good dad because last time he took me here. Last time he got me that. Yeah, but today he said he was coming and he's not here without an explanation. They defend and protect parents. And it seems like, well, I won't say it seems like this is clinically proven that the more severe the neglect, the more the children are committed to protecting the reputation of the parent. Here's something else I thought was interesting, and I think you'll see this in the relationships that we form, the dysfunctional relationships that we form. Children form what's called fantasy bonds. And a fantasy bond is a way that children will idealize their parents and begin to describe them in a way, or describe or attribute the characteristics that they are not offering them. So whatever it is the parent is not doing, the child kind of fantasizes about it and pretends and talks about it like that parent is like that. So for example, if the father is never there, they'll always talk about the times that he was there like it happens all the time. Isn't that something? If the parent is somewhat abusive in their language, or if they're physically abusive, they'll make excuses and then they'll say, well, my dad is strong. Now he picked me up and threw me on the floor, but that's because he's strong. So they fantasize or idealize wherever the emotional needs aren't met. And the more that the child is neglected, the stronger that bond is. We see that in relationships, in dysfunctional relationships. Isn't that sad? That it seems like the worse the man treats the woman, the more she's invested in trying to get him to love her. Do you see how this begins as children and manifests in our later relationships? And so, because we're always trying to heal, and this being a lifelong process, wherever those spaces of trauma are in our life, we try to work them out through our relationships, through friendships, because some of these I think you'll see through friendships as well, even though we're talking about romantic relationships, but some of these same issues manifest in our friendships. And so, wherever that trauma was, whether it was emotional, whether it was physical, whether it was abandonment, verbal abuse, unavailability emotionally, we choose partners and friends as we try to resolve that trauma. Interesting. I just want to sit that there for a moment. We choose. A lot of times people are like, these people just come into my life. We choose. We choose. We are drawn towards certain kinds of people, again, based on our previous experience. Let's talk about the kinds of dads. Okay. And then we're going to talk about the relationships. So the kinds of dads. Okay. And you're going to see, again, some great dads in here, or I think within these 6 types of dads, you're going to see shades of dads that you may have known, the dad you may have wished for, the dad that you had, that you're sad that you had. But you'll see the different kinds of dads. Okay. The first one, which on the surface we say sounds like a really good dad, a dad who overindulges. Now, if this dad sounds familiar, give me some likes. A dad who overindulges. This is a dad who gives everything to this little girl, especially rewards that she hasn't earned. She just wakes up and she's got gifts on her bed, or gifts in the car, or something in her lunchbox. But he gives rewards that aren't earned. So that sounds on the surface pretty good. Why would that be a bad thing? A dad who always makes sure, I'm glad you identified yourself. Why would that be a bad thing though? A dad who is showering a young girl with gifts. Why, how could that be? You're right, the zebra cakes. How could that be a negative? How could that be a negative? It sounds pretty good, right? A dad who's a provider, he's making sure that she doesn't want for anything. Maybe the things that she's seen on TV before she even asks, he makes sure that she has them, right? How could that be? How could that work against her later on? That's what I want to start with the good dads. And that's why I was saying this was an equal opportunity topic. This is not just for women who did not have a dad, or this is for everybody. Because what expectations, she would expect her man to spoil her. Absolutely right. You get 100. So all of this attention that he's giving her, and the affection, and all the gifts and everything she could ever want, that sets the stage for her to think that's just what men do, right? And so everybody is going to just spoil me rotten because I show up and I smile. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So it kind of gives it sets the stage for some unrealistic expectations as she moves into relationships as an adult. So the next kind of dad is an emotionally distant dad. So what does that look like? That's a dad that's there. He's present. Okay. He lives there in the home consistently. He works, but perhaps he doesn't engage emotionally. So he may have conversations about the weather, what just happened on the news, a TV show, but he's not going to discuss feelings, definitely not yours, and you can best believe not his. So an emotionally distant dad, what does that do for a woman? I see Jackie said, my dad, he never said no. Yeah, when they can't say no, right? Going back to that first one. And so then when your partner tells you no, all of a sudden now there's conflict. You don't really love me, right? Because the message that you've been given is whatever I want, I get. And so failure to do that means this man doesn't love you. So the emotionally distant father, again, he's present. So on paper, it may, your family may read, we have this really excellent family. We got a mother and a father in the home. We got the kids. We got the nice grass. We got the cars in the driveway, whatever. But my dad never talks to me about anything with depth. And so a woman learns in a relationship with her father like that, that to talk about my feelings may make me seem weak. To talk about my feelings is not respected. Or that men just don't do feelings. And if you tuned in 2 Fridays ago, we had 4 men on a panel who told us that men are emotional creatures. So if we have a father that's not, though, that's your value system. That's your value system. That no, there's not I couldn't tell my partner about my feelings because he wouldn't understand it. And so to a man, you come off seeming really cold and distant yourself, but you're really operating in what? In what you've experienced as a child, that men don't do emotions. And so I'm just not going to lay it over there. Or maybe you tried to bring your feelings to your dad and he shut you down. And so then you learn, again, men don't do feelings. And so I'm not going to approach my partner with that. The next kind of dad that you may have experienced or have heard of are dads who are violently abusive. And that's both physically and verbally, as well as emotionally. They tend to be very impulsive, which means their anger can go from 0 to 60, like that, where you can't even identify where the anger comes from. And he kind of has everybody on edge and jumpy, and he's unable to control his emotions. And so a woman who has a dad like that learns to walk on eggshells around men, because I don't want to upset him. So I may overindulge this man so he stays calm and he doesn't get upset. And again, so he will love me. And children will learn that we don't bother daddy. And the mother may even be saying that to the children. We don't bother dad. We don't want to get him upset. He's had a rough day. He's got a lot of things going on. And so now the girl has learned, I have to be nice to daddy at all costs. I can't talk to him about anything that's going on with me. I can't share anything that's going on in the house. I had to try to take care of him at all costs. And she will choose a man just like that. Again, so she can be affirmed and loved, because that's what she's learned love is to suppress her feelings for the sake of her dad. Isn't that amazing? Are you seeing how this unfolds? This, when I tell you this, like blew me away. Some of this I knew, right? Of course, but a lot of it is just, it brought back a lot. It gave me a lot to think about, right? As both a parent, as a woman herself. This is really deep. So the next kind of dad, controlling and toxic. So what does that look like? So a dad who is overly involved. Again, on the surface, this may look good. You got a dad there in the home, and he basically micromanages the daughter. So what she's wearing, who she's spending time with, what is she doing with her time? What is she watching on TV? Who are her friends? What are her friends wearing? What are her friends watching? What are you listening to on the radio? And it's like, my God, I can't breathe. And so on the surface, it looks like he's being very protective, but he's really being overprotective. And anytime we see over, we know that's problematic. Okay. And so that becomes very, very toxic. Sometimes the messages that come from a controlling or a toxic father is that you're not good enough. Sometimes there's an overemphasis on the young girl's femininity as she's developing and changing physically. So he may be very, very invested in what she's wearing to, again, to cover up. He doesn't want anybody to see that, again, she's becoming a woman. So there's no makeup. Wear your hair, keep your hair in those braids. So controlling. But the messages that come from that control is, again, you're not good enough, or there's something wrong with you that I don't want people to see, or that I'm trying to fix. And so in the name of him trying to love, there's a level of toxicity that comes through those messages. Hey, Senya, I haven't seen you in a while. Welcome. So we got two more types of dads. So we had, just to review for those of you who are just coming in, we got the overindulgent dad who spoils the girl right. We've got the dad who is emotionally distant, doesn't operate in feelings. We got the dad who's violently abusive, has some anger issues, that has kids walking on eggshells. We have the controlling and toxic dad that's always trying to fix the daughter and control everything she does so she doesn't mess up. And next we have the distressed and the full of anguish dad. So the dad who has no hope. He's always negative, defeated, depressed. The world is falling down around him. He may or may not be an alcoholic, but he does not balance his emotions well. And so the job of the daughter and oftentimes the wife is again to balance him. So he's okay. All right. So I don't want to do anything to upset him. In fact, I'm probably going to do more, right? So daddy will smile. I'm going to try to do whatever I can to make him feel better. And of course, we know if somebody is probably, this would be most closely associated with clinical depression, that's a bottomless pit. So I don't care if you tap dance, I don't care if you draw him a picture, I don't care if you make him a cookie, he's still not going to smile. But yet that child, that daughter will continue. She'll choose a man just like that she has to consistently impress. She's trying to impress him to get her to love him. We'll find the guy. Nobody loved him. The last woman he was with treated him so bad. Well, I'm going to show him that all women aren't like that. And I'm going to treat him better than anybody's ever treated him. And he's going to love me. You're going to be loving him until the cows come home, and he will never be able to love you back because there's a hole in his soul. And that's because you had a toxic and controlling, distressed and full of anguish father. The last kind of father is the physically dependent father. And this is something that I had not considered before I did the reading for tonight. And this is a father who can't do for himself. Again, for whatever reason, whether there's been an injury. Thank you, Jackie. I was like, somebody talk to me. Whether there's been a physical injury or he's incapacitated because of drug or alcohol use. But a father who's physically dependent and depends on his child, in this case, a daughter, to have his basic needs met because he can't care for himself, sets the stage for that daughter to become easy to manipulate financially, emotionally, and according to my reading, sometimes, I said till the cows come home, and in some cases sexually. Because if that father is incapacitated, there have been cases while the daughter is taking care of those basic needs, and she sometimes stands in the place of the mother, she may or may not be asked to do just a little bit more than what is normally expected. And so because my dad can't do for himself, there's that empathy and there's that sympathy. What does she learn from that situation? That there's no boundaries for me. I have to do whatever this person needs because they can't do for themselves. And so you will see a woman, and I've seen cases of it. I've had clients that have dealt with this. Like every man I've ever dated had a drug or an alcohol problem. And you go, wow. So what's the chances of that? Is she in a bad zip code? What is it? No, she's choosing this man because she's looking for somebody who's just like her dad, because that's the example she's seen of men. Okay. And a good woman stands by her man regardless. So if she saw her mother in that space, and so again, my dad is incapacitated, he's on this couch, and we do this. And I'm not saying that this can't happen in a positive. Again, we're talking about even doing the right things, how without some discussions about why things are happening, how it can manifest negatively. So if we never say to this, never say to the child, that these are the things we can do, and these are the things we can't do. You can see how this can be all encompassing. And again, you choose friends that are needy, friends that can't and won't do for themselves, men that can't and won't do for themselves, and you consistently love, 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 so you can get that love back, because that's the cycle that you were in as your identity was forming and you were learning about life around you. Okay, isn't that a lot? That's a lot. So what does that look like in relationships? So a woman that has daddy issues, and again, remember, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, when psychotherapy was first really becoming a thing in our society. Hey, Alarise, it was called the father complex. And so psychologists found out, wow, kids who are raised by dysfunctional fathers operate very differently. And so initially they identified that for just boys. They looked at boys, that if a boy is raised by a dysfunctional father, he doesn't function well. He becomes a dysfunctional man. But as they continue to explore, they found out, guess what? Having a dysfunctional father or an absent father affects women as well, but it affects them in a very different way than it does men. And so, like I said, I might end up doing another show talking about how it affects men. And I have to have some men come on and talk about that, because I've never been a man. I've raised a man, but I've never been a man. So what does this look like for women in relationships? Now, again, get ready. So when you hear yourself, you just go off the screen and say, ouch, because I saw myself in a couple of these and I said, oh boy, time to get back on the couch. So the first one is, you'll see a woman who's anxious about attachments. Anxious attachments. So what does that look like? She meets a man and there's the honeymoon period. Oh, he's so good to me. Look at him, he's so handsome. We go here, we go there, we do this. But inside, this is the dialogue that's going on in her head. I know he's going to do something. And she's waiting for the other shoe to drop, because she's had this dysfunctional relationship with her dad. Hey, Bess, where she's been disappointed, or again, she's been overwhelmed, or she's had to, he couldn't be this good, because men just don't act like this. So they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just know I know he's probably going to leave. This is probably not going to last much longer. If he's acting right, he got to be cheating on me. There's no way that he could be treating me this well. Or I know at some point he's going to creep, he's going to ghost me. Or the last one, he's going to do something to hurt me. Because the men that I've experienced, they just don't act like this. And so you almost sabotage the relationship before it begins to protect yourself from being hurt. Sometimes that anxious attachment looks like being clingy or needy. You don't want the person out of your sight. So you got to constantly be calling, you got to constantly be texting. Or if he does start acting weird towards you, you'll stay. Because staying is better than being alone. So you know this person isn't treating you right. Definitely not treating you like he was when you met him. But you're like, I don't know if I want to go back to being by myself, especially if that father hasn't been there. And everybody talks about how much better it is, right, to have a man around. And we know a man is heavy currency, right, in the Black community. I know I heard women all while I was growing up, it's better to have half a man than have no man at all. So even though this man is raggedy and he's treating me like Alabama trash, he's here. So let me hold on a little while longer, and let me hold on real tight, even though I know at any moment I'm feeling like he might leave. Anxious attachments, anxious attachments. I hear the old me in there, that needy and that clingy. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard from him. Oh my God. See, I knew he was going to leave. I knew. The man is working. The man is working, trying to pay some bills, but you haven't heard from him. Okay, Kelly. Hey, Meredith. Good evening. Glad to see you here tonight. So, anxious attachments. The second way daddy issues shows up for women in relationships is being afraid to be vulnerable. And we hear that word a lot, vulnerable. We have to be vulnerable. That's the soft part of us, right? That we can kind of relax and just be. What's the biggest lie ever told? Talk to me, Jackie, before I go back too far. What's the biggest lie ever been told? I hope she'll give me an answer and I'll come back to it. But being afraid to be vulnerable, being afraid to just be yourself, just let your hair down and talk about what's on your heart. Be able to say what it is you really believe, what you like, what you want, what you do, what you don't do. Oh yeah, that's a huge lie. She was talking about the biggest lie ever told is that it's better to have a piece of man than no man at all. But there's a lot of people that live according to that. A lot of people. Okay, I'm holding on by a thread so I can say I got somebody. Hey, Lorna. Hey, big sis. What'd you say? That half a man? I heard that too growing up and saw quite a few fall for that. Yeah, and people still are. Because that carries some weight again with the peer group. Well, at least I got him, and girl, I gotta get home because he's gonna be looking for me. That man ain't looking for you, ain't a bit more concerned than a man in the moon, and you come home. But that woman feels like that gives her some status to be able to say there's a man waiting home, even if that man is no good. So being afraid to be vulnerable. What does this look like? We see women who are defensive, untrusting, suspicious, and argumentative. And I cannot tell you how often this comes up when I'm talking to clients and when I'm talking to other relationship bloggers and folks who talk about relationships on social media and on the internet. This is the biggest one that men are running into as they're looking for suitable partners. They were like, these women have been hurt so bad that they show up on the defense and it is impossible to get to know her because she's like, I'm not going to get God. So I'm going to stand up. And if you say something that sounds like something my daddy said, or sounds like something, or looks like something he did, I'm going to get you before I get God. So argumentative, cold, or just closed off. I'm only going to talk to you about me to a point, because if I tell you too much, you will hurt me. Now, I do understand and always suggest that we should be cautious when we're going through the vetting process of finding a suitable partner. But at the same time, there's a certain level of vulnerability. There's a certain level of softness. There's a certain lowering of boundaries that needs to take place for a person to get to know you. I think that should be incrementally done, but it's necessary. Otherwise, the person is like, well, gee whiz, I don't know what else to do. I ask you a question and you tense up. I ask you a question, you go quiet, I get the silent treatment. Or everything I say is an argument because you think that makes you sound strong. You think that makes you sound grown. You think he's going to respect you if you hold your ground. And all that's doing is driving that man away because somebody hurt you a long time ago, or somebody told you to shut up and sit down. And you're still reacting to that every time a man talks to you and asks you something. Let me see what I see. I concur, the biggest lie ever told. They still talk about that half a man. So we can be needy or clingy if you have daddy issues. You can be afraid to be vulnerable and be argumentative, trying to be strong. Now, here's one that comes up a lot, and that is using sex to feel loved or avoiding sex altogether. So I know some women, right? And I've worked with some women who, as long as I'm sexing him, I know we're good. So as long as he's touching me, he's spilling on me, we in this bed, I know I got him, and also know where he is, right? So if she's anxious about losing him, Maybe he won't come home. Maybe he's gonna run away. Maybe. If I can sit on that face and distract him and keep his attention, then I don't have to worry about losing him. And that's another big lie. That's another big lie. But that's somebody again with a bottomless pit, something that has not been filled by that relationship. That's the only time maybe she felt love is when she got that hug from her dad when he came every once in a while, or when she sat on his lap every once in a while. I knew then that I was loved. And I knew then that as long as I sat with my dad or held his hand, some kind of physical closeness, he would be there. And so she learned I can use my body as a way to keep this man in this space with me. And we know, first of all, logically, at some point, you got to get up out the bed, right? That's one thing. And number two, sex has never kept a man. That it adds to the relationship, a real relationship, but it has never kept a man that doesn't want to be there anyway. But yet, women will try. Or they go all the way on the other end of the spectrum and avoid sex. And I've heard a lot of men talk to me about that as well. We'll cuddle up, we'll talk, we're having this intimate conversation. But if I go to reach for her, it's a problem. It's only going to go so far. Good evening, Pat. Good evening. Okay. And so obviously that's going to stem from someone who's been taken advantage of, may have been sexually abused, or boundaries crossed, right? So maybe they never touched you, right? But the way they looked at you, the references they made about your body. So I don't want you to see me that way. So I know some women who will dress down. They won't dress feminine. They're not lesbians, okay? They're not butch. They just play down their feminism because they don't want to be attractive to the opposite sex, because then if you don't see me that way, I won't have to deal with that. Because I remember when I dressed a certain way, nothing provocative, but when it was obvious that I was a woman, I was taken advantage of, or there was uncomfortable attention paid to me by my father, that controlling toxic father. Those were the case studies that came up with that he was hyper focused on what she wore because he didn't want anybody to see her breasts growing. He didn't want anybody to see her hips spread. He didn't want anybody to see her buttocks enlarging. And so because of that attention, now I'm uncomfortable with myself. So I don't want anybody to see me this way. And I definitely don't want you to touch me. So they just shut themselves down and shut off their partner. Isn't it sad? Isn't it sad? And of course, you're not going to be vulnerable and explain this if you even understood it, right? Definitely if you were, like I said, if you were violated in any way, that's a very private concern. It's going to be hard to share with somebody. You got to make sure that you can trust them. And no, that's not something that I would suggest you would say on a second date. But I know some folks who have been married for years and the wife is cold and the man, I don't understand. I never did anything to her. I wonder if something happened. And I, had a client, he asked. And when he asked about what happened to her, and she shut down worse. So it's really like, it's a real slippery slope, but it manifests. Daddy issues can manifest that way. Trust issues goes without saying. Trust issues, past experiences or narratives may have taught you directly or indirectly that men can't be trusted. And I know a lot of women who were taught that you can't trust these men. A man don't do nothing but lie. So the man shows up and you have already decided he's a liar. I'm waiting for the first lie. And as soon as I catch it, I'm gone. Now, again, I am never telling anybody to throw out your past experiences, but this whole conversation is about those foundational experiences being your truth and being able to work past them, to understand whether positive or negative. If that's who your father was, that is not everybody. And I'm going to come back to that in the positive in a minute. Trust me, I will. But the trust issues are a big one. Sometimes it's because the man you trusted, your father, wasn't there or he let you down. So now but that's just what men do, right? That's what men do. They used your trust to form a relationship and then abandoned you. I've seen women have that happen, not just with their fathers, but with stepfathers as well. They form a relationship with the daughters or with the children because they want to be close to that mother. And then when the relationship is over with the mother, he's gone. So you're like, I'm not trusting anybody who tries to treat me well because all they do is leave. And so what does that look like? What does the non-trust look like? Insecurity, sabotaging the relationship. I'm gonna go ahead and do something and see what he does so I can get this over with. Because men can't be trusted. Whatever I tell you, you'll use against me. So that goes back to the vulnerability piece. And so there's no way in the world you can be in a relationship or trying to develop a relationship if you have trust issues. And that's how it manifests. I just don't trust you. You're a man. You have a penis. And people who walk around with penises lie. I can't trust you. You didn't do anything. I just can't. Unfortunately, you are a man, and that's what men do. And there's a lot of women who are walking around with that, whether they verbalize it or not. That behavior shows that that's your belief system. And so I'm going to treat you accordingly. You pick unhealthy partners. You choose what you're used to. That's another manifestation of daddy issues. Somebody who keeps, women tend to choose a man who keeps you feeling insecure. And what do? You chase him harder. Those fantasy bonds we talked about earlier, right? And so the more this man ignores you, the more attention you're going to give him, because that's what you've been used to doing, right? If I walk on eggshells with my dad, eventually he'll smile. Eventually he'll pay attention. If I'm really good, right, then he'll talk to me. And so you'll choose a man like that, right? An emotionally unavailable man. And I did a show about that. I got to go back in the archives and find it. Why do we choose people who don't want us? Or why do we want people who don't want us? It's strongly tied into this. It's what you're used to. Men don't attach easily. If that's been your experience, then that's what you think, that you got to jump up and down, pick me, pick me, pick me. And the more he ignores you, the more you want him, because that's been the experience that you've had. That's love, right? If my dad loves me like that, if my father loved me like that, if my grandfather, my stepfather loved me like that, then certainly that's what I must need to do for this man to love me. And then the men who reach out to you where you don't have to do all of that manipulation, they seem like stalkers. They're like, great, calling me all the time. Why wanting to take me out? Why you want to take me out all the time? Because you're so used to people being unavailable. A man who's trying to show up and show some interest seems weird. He might even seem weak because he's so available. You're used to people being unavailable. So flipping that narrative is really hard, really, really, really hard. It also manifests, and this is, again, one that looks good as we're growing up, but sometimes works against us. And so this was something that I read. They were saying that workaholics. So if you had a dad that's a workaholic, you will look for this kind of man who's not available. Because again, you're used to your dad either always coming home late, not being there, or when he's there, he's just kind of in his chair with his beard. He's not there. He's not there to connect with you emotionally, but he's physically there. And so you'll choose a partner that's the same way, right? So if they're not a workaholic, they may be an alcoholic. They may be addicted to drugs, but they're there. They're just not fully present. So isn't that something? It's something that on the surface seems very positive, right? That works hard, to bring home that bacon so mama can fry it up. That can work against you because you think, wow, that extreme is the expectation. And I choose somebody else who operates like that because that's what I've seen as normal. So workaholics, they said, if your dad was a workaholic, sometimes you'll choose, again, someone with other addictions or other extreme behaviors, because again, that's what you're used to, someone who's there, but not there. I got a few more and then we're done because we're a little bit past time. If you have daddy issues, where are the available men? I'm waiting. Girl, that's a whole nother program. They are there. I'm finding that you know what, you know where the available men are? Places that we have not paid attention, and men that we have looked over. That's all I'm gonna say, because that's I don't want to take me off topic. But there's some available men. No, it is not as many as we would like. It is a numbers game, but there are some guys that we're overlooking. And so women with daddy issues tend to have a little trouble setting boundaries. They have trouble saying no because they find if I say no, what? You're gonna look down on me. You're not gonna speak favorably about me. I might not. You're not gonna accept me. Definitely, we will talk later. They're not gonna accept me, so I'm not gonna say no. So if this man is constantly asking me for money, even if I don't have it, I'm gonna find it. So I don't want to tell him no. Because if I tell him no, then he's not gonna come around. And if he doesn't come around, then I will have lost him. And then see, there's no man around. We know the goal, right? If there's been no man in your life, to solidify and lock in this man. So if he wants all your time, okay, if he takes up all your space, I'm talking about dating, I'm not talking about marriage, okay? But there's no boundaries. You just let him kind of fly and do whatever he wants to do, even if it's causing you pain and discomfort, because you don't want to tell him no. Which kind of father was that? We talked about that already, right? So the controlling and the toxic father, right? The verbally abusive father, you're gonna do anything at all costs not to upset him. So I'm gonna just keep on doing whatever it is, whatever I have to do to keep you here, even if it is something that, again, makes me uncomfortable. What about the woman who puts her partner on a pedestal? Have you ever met anybody like that? She talks about her man like he's Jesus in the second coming. She idealizes him. He does everything perfect. He does everything perfect. And a woman does that who was hungry for the attention and the traits of her father that she's espousing to this man. So again, if her dad was not a good listener, she's like, oh girl, he just listens to me. I just be talking and he just listens to me and he just smiles. Those fantasy bonds again. But instead of forming the fantasy bonds with the father, the woman forms the fantasy bonds with the partner or with the husband. So for everything that he's lacking, she pretends he's doing that and builds him up, and then does everything she tries to do and worries about pleasing him and getting accepted by him. Because this man, who I really don't think I deserve, right? Because I've never been told I was good. This dad never told me that I was good, even though I was doing all these things to try to be good. If I can get this man to stay, then that means I'm a really good woman. Isn't that something? And when you meet this man, you go, is this the man she was describing? Are you serious? This guy? Yes. Isn't he wonderful? And she's the only person that can see it or hear it, because she's built up in her mind he's that person. Just like she built up in her mind that her dad was that person, and he never was. Isn't that sad? So putting your partner on a pedestal and thinking that if I'm worthy of this man, then I'm okay. And that man is nowhere near worthy, but you're building it up. And sometimes in his head. I've seen that where women have built a man up. He didn't think he was anything. And then she started telling him he's everything. Now, before I go up the slippery slope, I am not suggesting that you should not build up a man who's not believing in himself. I think women have an uncanny ability to do that. I believe the nurturer in us, we were created to do that. But I've also seen women build a man up to a point that he thought he was better than her. And it became an ego problem. That's what I'm talking about. Where you fill his head up so much that now he's too good for you. So there's a balance there. And so the last one is pretty classic. It's pretty classic, right? Dating older men. And when they talk about older men in the literature, it's 10 years or more, right? So, because I was at first like, is that me? Because I've always dated men that were slightly older than myself, at least 5 years. I don't think I've ever dated anybody less than 5 years older than me. Isn't that something? Maybe just recently I dated somebody my age or a little bit younger, but traditionally, I know, but traditionally it's always been about 5 years. So if you date a man that this is showing typically women with daddy issues who have had dads, any of those six type of dads, if they date men who are 10 years or more older, it's typically because she's trying to resolve those issues and find a man that gives her some safety and security because of that age that she did not have with her dad. The other piece of that, which kind of ties into that overindulgent dad, is a woman a lot of times will choose a man older because he's financially established. And so he can provide some of those same things for her that the overindulgent father gave her. So a guy her age, he can't have a bag or a box under his aunt every time he comes in the door. But this older man can and may do that too because he feels like he has to do these things to, to impress her, right? And that's his little girl. That kind of father-daughter dynamic plays in, especially when you start getting into 20, 30 years difference. It can. It doesn't look the same way in every relationship, but that tends to be the case. It can be overwhelming. So we know a lot of couples work well with that age difference. Okay, but they have found that in some cases that age difference manifests with some controlling. And we talked about the controlling father earlier, right? And so sometimes a woman will choose an older man and they like the fact that he kind of micromanages their life. They kind of like that he tells them what to do and how to do it. And oh wow, what would you do if you didn't have me? Okay. And he kind of likes that he can tell her because a woman his age, he probably won't be able to navigate the relationship that way. But there's a slippery slope between guidance and structure and controlling her. And so oftentimes that dating an older man can go south. Or we sometimes see where a woman will grow up. That man may grow her up and finish the work that didn't happen with her father. And then she leaves because that problem has been resolved. Isn't that something? So I thought we would go a little bit deeper than just, oh, she dating older men. She's got daddy issues. There's a little bit more to it than just, oh, I didn't have my dad or I'm missing my dad. I want a guy that's older. There's really some intentionality about that, right? So what he brings to the table in terms of the structure of the relationship as well as his financial means. So what can we do about this? I still got a few people with me. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you all are still here. So what in the world do we do if we have daddy issues? And I found out, like I said, in preparing for you all, I got a few. I thought I was good, but I have some daddy issues. I'll tell you one, because I'm not going to tell all my business on here, but the one, and I think it plagued me when I was a younger woman, not so much now, but when I was a younger woman, I thought that all men were like my dad. I thought, oh, yeah, I'm praying. We definitely can pray. I thought all men were like my dad. And so if he wasn't just like my dad, I would reject him. So my daddy issue is that I guess maybe I held him up on this very high pedestal that nobody could meet. Now, I didn't find that anywhere in the literature. I'm just telling you about Kimberly King. And so that was a problem, right? So you don't work like him. You don't fix things like him. You're not cute like him. You don't dress like him. Then I don't want you. Instead of realizing, here are the things that makes my dad really great in terms of character. He's a hard worker. He's trustworthy. He's dependable. Those intangibles, those are things that were worthwhile to find in a mate. But he didn't need to be a carbon copy of my father. But there were so many people in our family, as well as my mom, who were like, he is that person. And so I just thought that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go find somebody just like your dad. But that doesn't exist. And it's a lot of pressure to put on a man to say, you need to be like him. And if you're not like him, forget it, that I'm out. So that's my big daddy issue. And so, like I said, I've resolved it. I think there's some other ones that I'm in process that I'm not going to talk about on camera, but that was a big one. That was a big one. It's just realizing that. And so, in how to deal with daddy issues, that's number one, awareness. First thing is being aware that you have them, right? So am I argumentative? Am I fussing? Am I closing myself off? Am I choosing with this list of characteristics that doesn't exist? Am I suspicious of everybody? Am I waiting for the other shoe to drop? So getting some awareness, I'm hoping that listening to this broadcast tonight will help you bring some awareness. Am I doing any of those things? And if I am, why? Where did it start? Where is it coming from? Why am I sabotaging relationships that I really want? And I find myself acting out in ways that I know are counterproductive to starting a relationship, but I keep doing it. I keep doing it. Sister, it's time to have a conversation with yourself and get some awareness. So doing some reflecting, like I'm saying, how was, what happened? How were you raised? What was the good? What was the bad? But then I also want you to take it a step further. And this, again, does not dismiss any abuse that you may have experienced or any trauma that you have experienced. But I had this conversation with my cousin the other day. I said, have you ever thought about how our parents were raised? How was your father raised? If you know your father, how was he raised? Did he have his father in his life? If he did, what was his father like? What was his relationship with his father? And so again, not to excuse the behavior, but to try to understand it. When I even thought about the age that my dad was when I was born, my dad was 23 when I was born. I said, man, that's a pretty young person. I remember when I was 23 and my son was 1. I had no clue as to what I was doing. No clue. And so a lot of times when we think the age that our parents were and the background that they came from, many of them were doing, but I would say everybody is doing the best that they can. Sometimes the results are less than stellar, but I think most people are doing the best they can with the hand that they've been dealt. Look at the hand that your dad was dealt, if he was in your life or he is in your life. And that may give you a deeper understanding as to why he operated the way he did. Just as one point, and I think this makes sense, especially when we talk about the emotionally distant father. That one is probably the most common across the board, especially in my generation. I'm in my mid-50s, and women who are in my wow, your dad was 49 when you were born. That's a whole nother set of circumstances, right? So again, what does that look like? But what I was about to say is the emotionally distant dad is probably the most common because traditionally, right, men have been taught you don't show emotions. That's what women do. We don't do feelings, we do facts. And so if you had a dad that didn't talk about feelings, or you never saw him cry, or you never saw, that emotional side of him, he was trained for that. He was groomed for that. That was being a strong man. Nobody knew that was detrimental to boys or to girls to say to a man, don't cry. Men don't cry. So it might not be that your dad was closed off just because he didn't want to be. He was trained. He might have been trained or expected to operate in that way. And I know some women, even now, to see a man cry, oh, he's weak. I'm like, wow. So you want him to be sensitive and affectionate and all this, but you don't want him to cry. We talked about that on the show a couple weeks ago too. So make sure you go back and take a look at the broadcast. What was that, the 4th? Yeah, make sure the 8th. Take a look at that. So reflection, thinking about your past and as well as your dad's past. Journaling always, I'm always going to say, if you can't talk it out, write it out. And to go back and look at those words and to dig deeper and think about the whys. Journaling helps to get it out. It's better out than in. Whether you're angry or you're hurt or you're just wondering, you're not sure. Journaling is a great catharsis, we call it, a way to get it all out, to rid yourself of those toxins that you've been holding in that are stressful and straining and working against not just your mental health, but your physical health as well. So some journaling. Therapy, again, I'm always going to go there. Find a good counselor, find a good therapist. If you do not have insurance, there are programs that will work with you, right? On a sliding scale where you can pay what you can afford to pay. There's also some programs at local universities where clinicians do their practicums. And so in doing their practicums, they offer free services for counseling. If you need any of those references, please inbox me or put your name right here in the comments, and I will follow up with you and try to connect you with a mental health consultant, okay, a mental health professional. If you want light therapy, I do that, and I'll talk about it at the end of the show. So I do talk to people about life issues. And so I do light counseling is what I call it. So therapy. Here's some book titles. I love reading. I honestly believe us women must step away from it all and focus on being better for ourselves. Daddy issues manifest so much toxicity, and they do. And that's why I thought this would be a good one to talk about as we're looking at Father's Day this weekend. So take a look at these titles. I'm also going to put them in the comments once I sign off for tonight. But here's a few books that I thought might be helpful just to see it in print, and to maybe hear some stories where you can see your own story and realize you're not by yourself, right? That there's some other people who have experienced similar things and have come through. So one book that I thought was interesting, it said, "What Happened to You?" The title of the book is "What Happened to You" by Bruce Perry. And again, it's kind of a collection of people talking about things that happened in their childhood through parenting and how it's manifested in their life. Another one I thought was good, and just this title alone, right? Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. A lot of those descriptions, right, of the different types of dads, it's because they just emotionally were immature, either because they didn't have that support, or maybe there were other things in their lives that they had to deal with. Their own personal development was on hold. And so they became somebody's parent before they were really a fully formed human being themselves. So What Happened to You by Bruce Perry, and then Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. Here's another one, The Father Effect, Hope and Healing from a Dad's Absence. Thought that would be a good one, by John Finch. You know, I got to bring a Black woman in here for sure. The Value in the Valley, A Black Woman's Guide Through Life's Dilemmas. She talks about some daddy issues in there. Iyanla Vanzant. She's always a good one for helping you to reflect. Narcissistic Fathers by Rosemary Parker. I was like, woo. Yeah, I downloaded the sample of that. I said, I need to read the whole thing. And then the last one, which again kind of brings a close on this whole conversation. The title of this book is It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle, by Mark Wolin. And like I said, I'll put those titles in the comments after I log off. That's the most important message tonight. If you find yourself, or if you have found yourself being unsuccessful in relationships, and you have seen some of the behaviors that I described tonight manifest in your relationships, the anger, the defensiveness, the closed offness, if that's even a word, being needy and clingy because you're afraid that somebody's going to leave. You walk on eggshells. You don't want to bring up anything because you don't want to stir the boat and again, have them walk out the door. Or you're looking for the other shoe to drop. If that's you, if you heard yourself described, then you need to deal with that, sister, and deal with it quick, because you're the common denominator in the success or the diminishment of your relationships. I think you might see some of those same issues in your friendships. And so it is worth it to do the reflection, to do the therapy, do the counseling, do the reading, and get a hold of it so you can turn things around. It's not how you started, it's how you finish. And so you may have had some very challenging experiences. And I'm sorry if some of the things I described happened to you. I am desperately sorry. But I do know that you have the ability and the power and the strength to reverse your narrative and have a successful relationship despite having had daddy issues. And so we're going to get over this in 2022. We're going to do something different. We're going to make lemonade out of the lemons that they have been given. And so that's all I have for tonight. If you got daddy issues, there is healing available. It's up to you. And it can start today. So please share this. I will, I'll be sharing the YouTube link later on tonight. Please share this with somebody who may need to hear this. Replay it at a later time. Write some things down. Ask some questions. You want to inbox me, we could talk some more about this, because I just loved what I found out. And again, I said, gave me a whole lot to think about. Okay. If you're looking for life coaching or career coaching, any kind of coaching, right? Relationship coaching, you can find me on the Complete Suite LLC on Facebook. You can also find me in Love and Life According to Dr. Kim on Facebook. Okay, and I would be glad to talk to you about your stuff. That's what I love to do. Okay, but as for tonight, we're gone. Next week, we're talking about being beautiful. What is beauty in America, in our culture? What makes a woman beautiful? How do you know you're beautiful? Where do those messages come from? All right, so same bad time, same bad channel. Have a good evening. Thanks for your time and attention. Good night.